Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor.
Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send a message to others that they are not alone.
Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, and find some research information about PTSD. And if you can, look good while supporting Cracked Armor by buying some gear.
(10-9), did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 20 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. Take a second to give some shout-outs to listeners in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Odessa, Ukraine. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast and to support everything that's being done here. Very fucking cool of you. Very cool. I also want to say happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Enjoy the day. Enjoy time with the family. Enjoy time with your friends. Enjoy being a father. It's a gift. I've had some people reach out and say they want to hear more about my story. Ask if I would do an entire episode featuring only me. I really appreciate that you want to hear my story, that you're interested in the shit I've been through. However, the podcast was never intended to be about me, but rather about us. And by us, I mean those who are diagnosed, family of those who are diagnosed, people who live with those that are diagnosed, friends of those that are diagnosed, as well as those who have not yet been diagnosed, and people who are completely fine, no issues whatsoever. For the people who don't know or have no issues, I really hope that you take away from this the importance of dealing with traumatic experiences immediately if possible, and if not, very quickly. You need to process those experiences so that they don't become traumatic memories, but rather just memories. Again, as for my story, yeah, I'm going to share it. I will share it, but not yet. We'll keep going with just little pieces about me, little things. But when you listen to all the episodes, you'll start piecing things together. I will say that my post-traumatic stress is not only a result of all the shit I've seen, heard, smelled, and touched, but it's also a result of sanctuary trauma and moral injury. I will get into that more down the road. But that stung more than you probably realize. Because ultimately, in this job, you expect that everyone on the line has your six. And although most of them do, there are others that do not. Dr. Pamela Hall, a psychologist out of Los Angeles, an amazing, amazing person. She will be on an episode coming up in the next few weeks. In her book, PTSD Unplugged, she says, staying busy keeps us in real time and provides a buffer against trauma memory. So that says to me a few things. Number one, it certainly explains why the fuck I need to stay busy all the time. And that is not a new thing for me. I've needed to stay busy for several years now. For those who don't know much about me, I will say that I did undertake a project a few years ago called the Nova Scotia Lighthouse Project. You can look it up online. You can see photos. You can see videos that I've produced. And although it's quite a noble thing, ultimately it kept me busy and it required full attention of my brain, which meant I couldn't think of anything else, which is always a very good thing for me. I've played live shows with touring bands. I've brewed beer. I've done lots of stuff. The podcast is also helpful to me because it keeps me busy. And I love it. I really do love talking to people. I love hearing from listeners. I love editing it. And most of all, I love knowing that it's helping people. But it keeps me busy, which is also good for me. The other side of that is when you realize that staying busy is not just good, but it's also a coping mechanism, which can be double-edged. I mean, it's great for us to cope, but you also have to understand that coping doesn't necessarily mean that you're dealing with the issue. So, stay busy? Great, fantastic. Help people? Great. Absolutely stellar. But make sure that you are not using your tasks to flee the issues that are at hand for you. They still will be there. They still will creep up on you. They still will haunt you. Last thing I want to say before we start today's episode is I'm quite excited. There are Papa Tango Sierra Delta Challenge coins being minted right now and patches being produced as well. They will be available for purchase in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on those. I'm quite proud. They're pretty cool. And of course, I appreciate your support, but also your strength to carry that coin or to wear that patch and show people you don't give a fuck what they think about your diagnosis. Let's take a quick break. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at Papa Tango Sierra Delta Podcast @gmail.com. Cheers. We are back from the break. Thank you very much for staying tuned in to the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. Today I'm happy to introduce Constable Patrick Tilma as a 14-year member with the RCMP stationed in Terrace of E Division, which is British Columbia. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Larry. I appreciate you having me on.
Tell us about your journey.
My career started in Coquitlam Detachment, 2009, and I went from Coquitlam as general duty. I transferred to the Mission Detachment, which is also in the lower mainland of BC. From there, I had a strong desire to transfer to northern BC, but things didn't pan out at the time, so I got seconded to the Pacific Region Training Center, which is in Chilliwack, and I was an instructor for use of force and BFI and stuff like that. So I ended up taking a secondment there, and midway through that, staffing got a hold of me and said, hey, I know you've had interest in posts in the north before, so they gave me a list, and Terrace is where I ended up, so I'm up here. And I might as well give you a little bit of a background as to me before being a Mountie, I guess. I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents are from Europe. Oldest is 7 kids. I grew up in a really good home, good family. I don't have any childhood trauma. And I think it's important to talk about just because I do have respect for people that have gone through all sorts of different things in life before becoming an RCMP officer or before going through the trauma in whatever line of work they're in. But I never had any of that growing up, a really good childhood. From there, I ended up joining the armed forces right out of high school, pretty much. Spent a short period of time there in the reserves. Like I had already made the decision, I was probably about 12, 13 years old. I'd made a decision that I wanted to be a police officer. And we were living in North Delta at the time. So North Delta Police obviously had me intrigued. So after I was done with the military, I went through some civilian jobs. But ideally, I still wanted to be a police officer. And I did apply when I was 21 and I got deferred. kind of gave up on the idea at that point. But then I tried again and got into the RCMP when I was 30. So that's where my career started. I was super excited. And the Coquitlam Post was phenomenal. The community really likes the police there. I had some really good supervisors. I had a great staff sergeant as a watch commander, who we like to refer to them as old school, right? He had years and years of experience under his belt and just a solid fellow.
Are you calling me old school, Patrick?
I'm calling myself old school.
Truth. I love it. All good, man.
From that detachment, I ended up transferring to Mission. The point where my journey with PTSD started, that started in 2015, now that I look back. And it started with a physical injury. So, like I said, I had gotten transferred to PRTC. Great gig, working with a bunch of really good people. A lot of the members there had similar service to myself. Their families were in similar situations where they had kids. They were established families. We all got along really well. I was so excited to be there. And in 2015, I was riding my bike to work and a car pulled out. I was just loving life, super active, fit. Car pulled out and no choice to do anything, but I ended up smacking into it. Nowhere to go. That's where the journey started. I remember lying on a spine board and a neck brace, wasn't able to move my legs at the time, thinking this can't be. I've got so much stuff to do. I've got a family to support. I've got a job to do. Taking the ride in the ambulance, and this accident didn't happen very far from my home either, like 300 meters from where I lived. So we're on the same street.
Wow.
So ended up in the hospital. And the end of the day, I had broken my L1 vertebrae, was dealing with all the recovery associated to that. I remember at the time thinking, wow, like this was a second chance at life. Here I am teaching at PRTC, but I've got a bit of a fear of public speaking. The fear of public speaking kind of disappeared because I felt like I had this second chance on life. I felt like I'm going to recover, I'm going to get better, and everything's going to be, like just motion is the lotion, going to get through this. And the fact of the matter is, yeah, I did get better. It did make me a better person, but I didn't deal with it mentally at all. The other instructors were good. They would tell me, hey, you don't have to do this demo, just in case. We don't want you getting hurt. I think they were trying to be supportive, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I was the same person. It felt kind of like I was the weak link in the chain. So I wasn't dealing with that. And ultimately, when staffing reached out to me and said, hey, we've got some postings in Northern BC. We'd love to have you up there. You'd be an asset because you're an instructor. We can have you do CEW courses and everything like that on site. I looked at it as an opportunity, now that I look back, as an opportunity to escape without dealing with the situation, right? I looked at it, I was like, hey, you know what? The force is going to pay for a move. I don't have to drive by this bloody spot on the road where I got launched. Let's just take the move and leave and kind of get a restart.
Absolutely. I was just going to say the same thing, Patrick. It's a restart.
Yeah. So it did feel like a restart for sure. So I ended up transferred to Terrace. They say it's Northern BC, but really Highway 16 is the middle of BC. It's not Northern BC, but it's definitely more rural than the city folks would be used to. Beautiful community, about 10,000 people in town, 10,000 people on the outskirts in the more rural areas. We ended up being able to buy an acreage, and I'm an outdoorsy guy. I love hunting, fishing. So anyways, it's a little piece of heaven, and I didn't have to drive by that spot anymore, but I'm still in pain to this day. I still have to do things. I still have to do stretches. I have to maintain a level of fitness to cope with carrying a duty belt and wrestling with bad guys, etc. So at first I felt like I had the second lease on life. I was going to live every day as it was my last. I was really going to live in the moment. I felt like that started to fade, and it got replaced by the numbness and pain that you'd wake up and your back was stiff and you're like, bloody hell, why can't this pain just go away? Like, isn't there something that can be done? But it's something that you have to learn to live with.
Right.
And so Terrace is, like I said, a beautiful place to live. They have small community resources, but big city problems, like a lot of smaller communities in Canada. So being a Mountie that's used to having several PDS guys, having ERT on standby, having a helicopter available, having FIS in your building, just all these resources. Terrace doesn't have that. So there was a little bit of frustration. You'd have serious files and a lot of violence and not a whole lot of resources from a policing perspective, never mind the mental health perspective and the addictions perspective. There's just so many stressors. We always deal with trauma associated to this job. And I don't even have to go through examples of these files that we go to, but there's always trauma that you deal with. And I found that Northern BC had more trauma to deal with for sure, but we're just further away from resources like psychologists and psychiatrists and stuff like that. And even the ones that we have here, they're not trained to deal with PTSD or law enforcement first responder type trauma. They're trained to deal with drug addiction and alcohol addiction related trauma, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. So I'll just hold on for a second. The reason I really want to step in here, Patrick, is coincidentally, I had a session today with my psychologist, and we got into that very conversation about there being an insufficient number of psychologists that are available. And she was the one that brought up the point, and there's significantly fewer that are actually trained properly to deal with PTSD. And I mean, let's be honest, these kind of mostly type A personalities from military, police, firefighting, so on and so forth. That becomes a different thing when, I mean, a psychologist can be very, very good and trained to the T, but PTSD is something different. It can involve addictions, but it doesn't just mean addictions. So
Exactly.
That has to be challenging up there for you.
Yeah, and that's not the only challenge. I'll cover it off right now. My background, I'm conservative. I'm a Christian fellow. And so part of me, when I realized that things were going into a direction where I probably should talk to somebody, I'd have that internal conversation like, I should perhaps maybe just open my Bible and read more. Maybe my relationship with my creator is not where it should be. This is what the problem is, right? And I think that this could be helpful for other Christians too that are out there. I know it's important to obviously follow the structure and beliefs, but it was a roadblock for me. I just found that I delayed reaching out because I thought, well, I can handle this. All I need is God in my life. And I was wrong. I was wrong with that for sure.
It's a big thing to say, Patrick. That's a big thing to say, and I'm really glad you're sharing that, because there's no doubt there's others out there that are feeling the same thing. Regardless of the reason, they feel that, I've got this somehow, whether it's my belief, whether it's quite typically the bottom of a bottle. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I could see it happening, and I could see that there was files that were coming on, and I won't go into all the details, but there was a significant one where a lady died in my arms, and it was traumatic, and it ended up, as things went on, that specific incident turned into a night terror. The night terrors started summer or late summer, early fall of 2020. I started having these night terrors. And I've had nightmares before. Nightmare or a dream, you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm totally going to remember that. And you fall back asleep. And then when you wake up, you might remember parts of it when you initially wake up. And then you think back and you're like, shoot, like, what was that all about? Like, it was pretty whack, but you can't remember all the details. And that's just a standard nightmare or a dream. But I get these night terrors, and I tell you what, like, you're up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. The sheets are soaking wet. You lived it, like you relived the whole entire incident. And you're sweaty, you got goosebumps. And I'd walk into the living room. My wife would still be sleeping. I'd pour myself a glass of water. I'd sit in the dark living room, look out the window, and just try to like calm my breathing and everything down. And it would take hours. Like at first it was like, okay, what's really happening? And hadn't experienced anything like that before. And you'd ask yourself like, okay, what can I do to avoid this? Was I not drinking enough water, or was it my nutrition? I couldn't seem to figure out what the trigger was that would cause it. And then it started to increase. It would be like, once a week and then twice a week, and it was increasing more and more. And now you're losing sleep. And when that started happening to me, it became the point where I didn't really want to go to sleep. Like I was bag tired, but I didn't want to go to sleep because I was scared of the dreams. And this wasn't the only, there was two main specific incidences that had happened in my career that would fully enact in the dream. And it got hard to deal with because, when you're losing sleep and you're scared to get to sleep and you're trying to get back to sleep, and then you got to, let's say you're working shift work where you're up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and you just had a night terror at 2:30 and you try to get to sleep and you don't get to sleep, and then you got to work a shift. You're operating on a deficit, right?
Absolutely.
So the night terror started to happen. And I honestly, Larry, I didn't tell my wife. I didn't want to worry her.
Yep.
I thought I could handle it.
Yep.
At the time, I was an acting watch commander. So I had a bunch of young junior members underneath me. Here I am. I'm an ape personality for sure. Very stubborn. My background is Dutch, so it's, wooden head, wooden shoes, wouldn't listen, right? I had this. I wrestled with it and I didn't tell anybody. And I thought it would go away, and then it would be 2, then it would be 3 a week. And April 7th of 2021 was my first, we'll call it panic attack or anxiety attack. I had never experienced one before. And as police officers, many of us go to calls where people are having these attacks. They act out. They don't know how to react with stress to begin with. So they tend to end up calling us because something's happening. And they're really easy to see. For me, it wasn't like that. It was all internal. I was walking along with my wife. It was our 20th wedding anniversary. It should have been a great day. We were walking along a trail along this beautiful creek up here in Terrace. And it was all of a sudden I felt, and I have tinnitus as well. And all of a sudden the ringing got really, really harsh. My head felt like I was going to explode. My chest felt like it was going to explode. My legs felt heavy as we were walking and we weren't doing anything vigorous. And I'm looking at my Garmin watch and going, okay, well, what's my heart rate at? And my heart rate's, sitting in mid 60s. Like we're literally not working out at all. But I feel like it's pounding through my chest. And I look at my wife and she's just walking along. Everything's good. And she doesn't notice. And I'm focusing on my breathing. You know how we are, right? We're like combat breathing, trying to breathe my way out of this.
Exactly.
It lasted about 10 minutes, but I was like, that scared the hell out of me because I was fully awake. I'm fully awake and that happened. And I'm like, what just happened? I didn't tell my wife at the time, but I think it was that evening I broke down and I'm like, I'm not okay. So the next day I called for help. That was the first step. I called for help. And then, as you know, I got to experience how we don't have the help. We just don't have the systems available in a timely fashion, in an organized fashion. And there's so much I'd love to change looking at this picture from a different angle now. But at that point, I was like, I need help. I need to talk to somebody. There was nobody available. There was no psychologist available. And thank God I had a really good staff sergeant that I called and I says, listen, I can't get in to see my family doctor. He just flat out can't see me. And I can't even get a date because, of course, this whole pandemic issue, that hasn't helped anything either. He reached out to a psychologist who was amazing, but she was a critical incident debrief counselor.
Right.
She had a conversation with me. We discussed what was going on. And she's like, oh, my goodness, you waited too long. You should have contacted somebody sooner. So that's my first tip, Larry, to anybody who's listening is don't self-diagnose, regardless of whether it's religion or moral beliefs or whatever, or your lack of trust in the medical system, which I get to. Reach out because there are good people out there and get that journey started to support because it's really hard to get when you're really needing it bad and then now you're waiting. But she was amazing. First experience ever with talking to a psychologist, personally. And she told me, she says, look, you need to be talking to somebody on a really regular basis. Let's get you in touch with somebody. And short of it is, we couldn't get anybody immediate. But she even checked on me at 10:30 one night. She phoned. She's like, you're just on my heart. Needed to reach out, see how you're doing.
Wow.
And she didn't ask for my Hermes. I guarantee you she didn't do any billing or anything like that. Her mind and heart were in the right place. And she says, look, I just need to check on you. She says, I'm really thinking of pulling you off the road. And I told her, I says, you can't pull me off the road. we're not stupid, right? Like, even though we're suffering, we're super smart. And I'm like, no, I can't go off the road because I got to do this and I got to do this and I got to do that.
Yep. Sounds familiar. Yep.
I got a couple that's coming in on Saturday and I'm going to be doing some mediation for them and they only trust me. And she's like, okay, well, it sounds like your work is really important to you. You got a heart for what you're doing, but you have to make me a promise that if things get too tough, that you're going to reach out. She says, I will sign a thing for you to go off in a heartbeat, but you need to promise me that if you come to that point, you'll make that call. So I made that promise. I'm like, yeah, for sure. And life went on. So I'm on the waiting list, not hearing back about a psychologist, going back to work, trying to keep on going, really haven't told anybody that I'm working with. The only person that knows is my staff sergeant and my wife. I mean, she's now more connected. She's paying attention to what's going on with me. So that was April. So fast forward to August. Like I said, I'm an instructor, so I was teaching taser courses. I was doing taser research in between working regular blocks on the watch. So I'd work 2 days, 2 nights, and then I'd be teaching, and then I'd be going back to work and doing another block. So I worked over 20 days in a row, and I was getting burnt right out. I wasn't sleeping. When I got to September, I had something that I've never experienced before, and I never experienced it again either, was what the psychologist later described as a mind gap. I was sitting in the McDonald's drive-thru to get my morning coffee, and I'm exhausted. And there's a car in front of me waiting to order as well. And I don't know what happened. My foot's on the brake. Car didn't move. I'm in full uniform, fully marked PC. And all of a sudden, it felt like no time passed, but it felt like forever had passed. I felt like I just woke up. My body actually like twitched and I was like, whoa, I'm awake. What just happened? Like, how long have I been sitting here? And I was immediately sweating from my armpits right down to my duty belt. And
Wow.
The car in front of me was still the same car in front of me, hadn't moved. Don't know how long we were sitting there, but it felt like forever, but felt like an instant. And it shook me because I was like, what just happened? So I had an appointment to go see my family doctor. He needed a form signed. And when I went in there, he looked at me and he said, you all right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm all right. And he's like, no, like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm pretty good. I said, there was this one thing. I says, I had this incident the other day. I was, at McDonald's and I told him the incident and he looked at me and he's like, is everything else going? And the floodgates opened.
Yeah, there you go.
I was like, yeah, I'm not doing really good. I'm waiting for a psychologist. I'm still going to have a psychologist. And he's like, okay. He says, I'm taking you off the road. I says, well, you can't take me off the road, Doc. I've got stuff to do. So he didn't buy it. I ended up getting taken off the road. And he told me, he says, you're going to see me in another 2 weeks. And he says, oh, okay, 2 weeks and we'll be good to go. He's like, no. He says, I'm going to be following up closely with you. He says, but this is going to take a while. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to take just a couple of weeks. And he's like, no, this is going to take some time. I struggled with that because I thought, he's wrong. I'm going to show him he's wrong and I'm going to get back to it and things are going to be fine. And they weren't, right? And so from there, I went home and, we worked the 2 days, 2 nights on general duty anyways. And I'm used to having days off where I'm going to do a project or go out hiking, do whatever, mountain biking. But this was different because now it's like you're sent home, you've got a note and he's saying you're not going back to work. Like he doesn't think you're suitable to go back in uniform. And I had a fear of that. I actually had a big fear of that ever happening because
Absolutely.
I thought, how many times have you seen, and it's not just the RCMP, it would be other police forces or other agencies as well. And I know why they do it. And I'll say that they overreact. It's not always the case, but they do it to make sure that everything's covered. And I was really worried about if I reached out for help and, I'm a firearms instructor. I love guns and that was underlying too.
100%.
So I'm like, they're going to take away my guns.
Yep.
And I've got collector guns and I've got, that's my little wheelhouse. I make my own ammunition.
Yep.
Heck, you can't, if they took that away, I don't even know. And I knew it's short-sighted, but it was sitting there heavy on me oh, shoot, now what? the next time I put for my license, they're going to say that I was off on stress leave, and then they maybe don't give my license, I take my guns, who knows what happens. And my mind just went crazy with those thoughts.
And that's part of the reason a lot of people will not speak up. That was a concern of mine as well. For years and years and years, they're going to take me off the road. They're going to take my pistol. They're going to need to do special assessments on me. I'm a gun guy as well. I've worked with NWES, is what I do. It's all guns, right? And it scares the shit out of you. It terrifies you. And so what do you always tell yourself? You know what? I'm actually good. I got this. Yeah. I'm good. And I mean, you said earlier that it got left for too long, but that's also what we do. Because I don't know if it's just us type A personality guys or if it's a freaking Mountie thing. It always comes down to, yeah, that's not very good. I got shit to do. This happened to me again for years with my psychologist. I think you need to step back. Oh, it's not so good. I got a presentation I got to give next week. Got to go meet with Crops and JDiv, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if it's just us. It seems to be us coping because we are genuinely terrified of what the repercussions may be. And we just know that we're good at what we do, and we just fall back to doing it because, to use the word you just kind of said, it's sort of in your wheelhouse, is what you know what to do. But it makes things worse, man. It makes things worse.
Yeah, it's just an added level of complication to an already complicated situation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel really good about talking to you, to be honest, like just very honest, because even though it's hard to talk about everything regarding mental health and the situation, as long as I'm thinking about it from an aspect of trying to help other people, which I've fully convinced myself this is what it's all about, and more people need to talk about it, more people need to listen to it, more people need to engage in that conversation. But it's hard for us. And I know last time we talked about why it's so hard. I mean, yeah, we got the Police Act. We're concerned about, is there going to be repercussions? And at this point, honestly, I don't even care. If I can save the life of one other officer, it's all worth it to me. And I really mean it that way, because if my career goes a different direction just because I was trying to help out somebody else and save somebody else's life somehow, somewhere, maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it's a year down the road, they come across a podcast and it's like, we're talking about this conversation. You know what? If they know that they're not alone, that somebody else dealt with these similar experiences, these night terrors or whatever else that they've experienced, that they're not just the only one, and that there's a way out, and there's people that are able to continue to fight. And it's a continued fight, because it's just not going to be just over. But I just want to do everything I can to help others around me, and even on the greater scale. But
that's what you should be doing. I mean, and this is the concern it comes down to, is the catch-22. Because, I mean, we took oaths that we would protect the public, that we would do our jobs, which involves saving lives. So the concern comes down to is, well, what if saving a life goes a little bit contrary to, what they want shared or not shared, what we can and can't talk about? Well, I mean, that does create quite the ethical quandary, because ultimately, I mean, saving life should come first, period. The end. That's it. You are meant to save lives. After that, you can do other things. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Patrick, is I'm with you 100%. I have yet to know what the repercussions are going to be. And I accept whatever it is, because I truly believe this is to help people. I am not doing this for any other reason than to try and help people, because I know there was a long time I needed help and I didn't receive it. And I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen to others, or at least lower the number of people it happens to. So I guess I just wanted to take a second, Patrick, to say I really respect that. And anyone who's in the outfit will truly get what Patrick just said and the realities of it, that it's scary to step away and to speak. But they'll also have a lot of respect for you and realize, yeah, that takes a big set, buddy, to do that. And I'm proud of you for coming on, Patrick.
No, I appreciate that. And I have the same respect for what you're doing as well. And that's why I can't just, I know back when you said, hey, you want to speak? I was like, I need a little bit of time. And I thought about it more and more. And I just thought, you know what? No, we can't sit idly by. And anybody that would have malice towards people like us that are trying to talk and trying to look for solutions, anybody having malice towards that they're on the wrong side of the fence anyways. They should really be looking to join the others and help us move forward. And, I remember listening to the conversation you had with Jason and talking about how we have each other's backs in the field. We're on a scene, things are chaotic, and we have each other's backs. And then we get to the locker room, and what do we do in the locker room? Right? And how do we treat each other when all the dust settles, when all the noise fades away? How are we treating each other? And how are we picking each other apart versus how are we building each other up? And I think that's so, so important because I've seen it right from get-go. And even though I've always been in the crowd where never really ruffled any big feathers, but I've never been really the guy that, I just drift right in the center. But I've seen it. I've seen the, people picking each other apart and the sanctuary trauma that happens within every field, and us specifically, because I don't know if we do it because we're trying to make ourselves feel better. We're trying to impress other people. So in that process, we're looking for ways to boost ourselves by putting others down. And I wouldn't say I've participated in it, but I would say this. I have definitely not stood up in the past when I should have stood up. And on my return, I definitely have changed that mentality. So when I hear somebody say, "Oh, well, that happened to so-and-so," and, well, when I find out, I'll let you know. I will respond with, "How about you don't let me know, because it's none of my business and I don't want to know. I'm dealing with my own plate right here, and that's all I'm dealing with. And we need to stop the rumors and anything else. I don't want to know. So how about we don't do that?"
I love it, man.
So those are things that I can change.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about everything that's happened thereafter.
This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it, to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone.
Also, check out Willow Tree Farm, care of Jason Subkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who frequently updates his Instagram to share his story. You can follow him at jason.subkowicz. That's jason.Sierra Oscar Bravo Kilo Oscar Whiskey India Charlie Zulu.
We are back from the break. This is the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. Back with Constable Patrick Tilma out of Terrace, British Columbia, RCMP member. Patrick, thanks again for coming on the show. And let's continue, man. You've got me kind of at the edge of my seat here, buddy. Well, and I'm very interested in the story and what happens because you've hit on a lot of major issues. The fact that there is I'll say it, I don't need you to say it, but there is a toxicity within a police culture. There is a lack of needed resources, whether it's within our system or outside of the system. But ultimately, there's a lack of resources. There's a lack of support.
Absolutely.
To actually come out and talk and have each other's six, not just at the high stress situations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's continue your journey, man. Please.
When the doctor pulled me off the road and there I was sitting, I still remember looking out the window at the front of my house, and my wife had gone to work and my son had gone to school, and I'm on like days off forever. In my mind, it felt really weird because I'm always moving. I'm always doing something. I got to keep busy. Yeah, I have things I could do, projects around the house, etc. But I just felt lost. I felt like, okay, just got my identity stripped away. I'm not allowed to wear my uniform. I'm not allowed to go back on the road right now. I don't know how long. They're saying it's going to take longer than I think. It's a short time. And at that point, I've never been an alcoholic. I do love to try different flavor beers. That's kind of one of my enjoyment things. But like I said, I really have never struggled. But there's where I started to struggle because I was at home. No psychologist really locked onto me at this point. Health Services hasn't reached out to me at this point, and I have no idea what's going to happen. I remember looking out, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was done pacing from the front of the house to the back of the house, and to the front of the house and the back of the house. And I went to the fridge and I cracked a cold one. I was like, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I got to do something, and maybe this will help calm my nerves. And that led to the next one, I wasn't getting wasted, but I was just like looking for a constant buzz just to try to keep my mind somewhat numb to the frustration that, I need help. There's no help. I need help. There's no help. It was just like this continual thought process. There's no help. How am I going to get out of this? Like, there's no help. What's the next step?
Yep, I'm with you.
To be honest with you, I went for probably 3, maybe 4 weeks like that. And I think that's where, depending on who you are and what your support system is around you, which is so super important. But, here I am. I've been married for 22 years now. And, my wife and I, we've known each other since we were teenagers. And so she stuck with me to the thick and the thin, and definitely my better half. But I remember she looked at me and she's like, she's looking at the case and she's like, Kate, that was like, I bought that yesterday and like, we're done.
Yeah.
And she looks at me and she gave me the look that, like she didn't have to say much. She just looked and she's like, something needs to change. And she's like, you need to get a grip. Like, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it hit me. Right.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, things are out of control. Like, what do I do? I remember sitting there and going like, and I'm an active guy. Like I said, I've always been, and I'm like, okay, I got to do something, but there's no reason I was sleeping in the morning later and later and later, still waiting for help. Well, that night I actually set my alarm and I said, I'm going to have my breakfast and then I'm going to get on the treadmill. That was a good move. That was a really, really good move. I got up and I went on the treadmill. I ran 3 miles and I felt not like significantly better, but it was like I accomplished something. You know what I mean? Like I accomplished something. The sweat was happening. It actually did smell kind of alcoholic-y sweat, which
we know what that smells like the next day when you got to release someone from cells.
Yeah. So anyways, I was starting to realize at that point, like I think it was the realization that, we've heard that term before, like nobody's coming to save you.
Yep. That's right.
There's nobody coming to save you. It's you. And I really, really hate that thought because it's like, it's just you. But ultimately, like we've talked before, and I love how you've said it, yeah, you just don't trust anybody because who do you trust? You think that you're in the trenches with these folks and you've gone through thick and thin, and then all of a sudden you're off. And then it's like 3 months and nobody's reached out. And I say nobody, I'm exaggerating because there's a few people that reach out, but they don't even really know how to reach out because they do care, but they don't really know. We don't really take any training as to how to properly reach out to each other when people are off. It's more like, just leave them alone. They're dealing with stuff. Just leave them alone, give them time. But meanwhile, the person that's off is like, there's nobody coming to save me and I'm all abandoned.
You feel completely segregated, right? Yeah.
Just felt worse. But as soon as I got to the point where I felt like, okay, nobody's coming to save me. I'm all on my own. There's nobody, which was somewhat wrong, but it's the way I felt at the time. In my heart, I replaced the feeling of that despair with like an anger towards the other members that weren't reaching out to me. I was like, you guys suck because, here I am. I've got nobody. Why should I reach out to you and say, how are you doing? Because I'm one off. But I was frustrated. I was super frustrated. And I put that anger into the treadmill. And so I started running every day. I just ran every day, like 7 days a week. I was on the treadmill, 3 miles every day. And, I see the progress and, my fitness was coming back and I was doing better and I started to feel a little bit better. Not perfect, but a little bit better. Around that time, I ended up having a really good sergeant that used to work with me, not on the same watch, but in the same detachment. And there's really good people still out there. And we sometimes forget. He said, hey, just checking on you. I know that, you're not doing super great. Have you been able to find a psychologist? And I said, no. And he said, well, maybe give this fellow a call. Maybe he can fit you in. And so I did. And the psychologist said, hey, yeah, I can take you. I'm really busy, so I won't be able to talk to you for a month. Well, that's freaking awesome. So here I am another month and I'm like, well, starting to come to realization that it's not going to be a quick journey. It's not going to be super fast. And so I just kept on running on the treadmill. And that's when I heard, you had a guest on talking about fitness and running and doing ultra marathons. And that struck a chord with me because I realized that the link between the physical fitness part and the mental stress part, I think it's closer than we realize.
I agree.
As I reflect back now about depot, we go to depot and some of us like PT, some of us didn't like PT. But the fact of the matter is you were away from your family and your friends and your circle that you grew up with and you were familiar with. And you're placed in a group of complete strangers that you spend, 24, 26 weeks with, sometimes more. And you're taught all sorts of new tactics, and you're subjected to all different benchmarks and training and different stressors. And somehow you manage to make it through, because middle of the day, they say, hey, you're doing a Cooper's run. And then you go straight from Cooper's run, take a shower. You're still beating sweat after the shower, and you hop in and you start learning law and policy. As I reflect back, and like, wow, that's why you have a success rate when you have a physical demand where you're getting the blood pump and you're getting those endorphins running through your body. It's not everything. Like, I mean, there's other parts that still need to happen, but it's such a big part. And I find that even now, I feel like the pair should be much more prioritized than it is. What if we made that a priority? How would that affect members' mental health?
I agree. I mean, part of my issue when I really hit the shitter was I had really lost any self-esteem, self-respect. I put on about, 35, 40 pounds. You talk about drinking beer, buddy, I was brewing beer from scratch. So I mean, not just a case you need to get rid of. You're brewing a keg and it needs to go before you can brew another keg. Exercise? No, I didn't have time for it. I had no time for it between work. I mean, I was getting off at 1,500 hours and by 15:05 needing to crack a beer to deal with the stress. And I agree with you because, I went and got a Peloton bike, coincidentally, the same week I ended up going off just a couple of days before, and it's made a huge difference. I've been on the thing every day, and I don't know what it is, man. It's addictive. And again, anyone who's listening to this, and I know you don't want to get off the couch. I know you don't want to leave the house. I know you don't want to exercise. I really get it. But there's some things you just have to push forward on and try to accept that this actually is going to help a bit. It's not going to solve all your problems, but it does help a bit.
It's those little pieces of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
It's not the all, but it's part of it. Finally, here I am. I have this psychologist appointment a month out because he's so busy. And so we booked several on a weekly basis. I was at an all-time low level. The wait, it felt like forever. It was a month away before I'm even going to talk to this guy. Here I go on the treadmill and I'm feeling a little bit better. But I had my family doctor ask, do you have thoughts of suicide? And I'm like, no. I said, well, to be honest with you, like I pray on a nightly basis that God will take me in my sleep, because that's where I was at. I worked with a member in Coquitlam, and then he ended up transferring to Ottawa Police in, I believe, 2017. His name is Tom Roberts. He committed suicide on September 27th of 2019. And, I worked on the same watch with him, and I knew him quite well. And once you spend a few years in this career, you're guaranteed you're going to lose somebody that that has crossed paths with you.
Yep, that's right.
I've got poppies on my arm of I've got a poppy for each one that I knew well enough, like Adrian Oliver.
Yep.
He died in a car crash in Surrey, and he was in my little brother troop, right? And I welcomed him into depot. I still remember him coming down the escalator in Regina. But we lose these heroes all too soon. And it seems like every time we lose another one, it gets a little bit more difficult to deal with for some reason.
It does.
But I just couldn't, maybe it's the stubbornness that I had. I just could not do it on my own. Like I could not even think of doing it on my own. But I would have thoughts, oh God, like if I wouldn't wake up and it would be natural and nobody'd be embarrassed, it would just be like it happened. And I'd feel bad, and I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to stress my wife out. Here I am. What are you praying about? Well, I'm praying that I die.
Yeah.
But I didn't admit it till months later to my psychologist that, I've been having those thoughts. And those thoughts started to disappear with more exercise and setting a schedule for myself and kind of regulating myself that I had some sort of purpose to wake up in the morning. I ended up getting in contact with Mounties for Freedom through this pandemic. And so once I realized there was hundreds of other members that were frustrated with how things were going, because that was also weighing on me too. It's like, holy smokes, like what's going on? And I found out I wasn't alone. And I remember getting a message from the group at that time. And like I was looking through a blurry phone. I could hardly see my phone because my eyes were so blurry, just to see that it was like, I saw a message and it said, "You're not alone."
Yep, that's a big one. Yep.
And when I saw that message, I was like, I still remember I was in the Skeena Mall parking lot. And I think that it was that and the exercise at that moment that was started to pull me out. It was like, okay, I'm not alone. There's other people out there. And I think that's important from the aspect of mental health. I think that if you're suffering in silence and you're not saying anything, then you're just suffering in silence and you're not opening up that conversation. But as soon as we have this conversation like we're having now, we're realizing that, hey, there's differences. We can have differences of opinion on things and we can have differences of experiences that we have. And we still we're not alone. I think that's so important to know that we're not alone. And that'll lead me to the other part of what really helped me is learning about podcasts, because I honestly didn't listen to a lot of podcasts before. I started listening to podcasts and I started to learn a lot about myself as well as learn about information that would be on podcasts. And the one thing is, I think we know how to listen, but we don't always know how to listen. Like we don't always know how to absorb information, and especially if it's not information that we agree with. Because as soon as you agree with something, you're like, yeah, and you're on board and you're like listening on the edge of your seat. But as soon as something's introduced that's not necessarily something that you buy or they don't have you there, without realizing it, we can drift off into our own thought process because we're so busy forming our argument or our counter to that comment in our mind. And so we drift off and we're not truly listening anymore. And so I really learned a lot about myself and my ability to listen and to question things, but at the same time accept a viewpoint without having to accept it myself. I could at least understand a viewpoint. And so I really got into listening to podcasts. And then I listened to a podcast, I believe it was Constable Mark Bouchard, and he was talking about night terrors. And I was like, boom. Again, like I said, not alone. You know, the courage that it took for him to talk. And now I'm able to listen to this and find out that, hey, I'm not a nut bar. My body's just telling me stuff and I've got to pay attention.
That's right.
And then in January of 2022, I've been working with my psychologist at this point. So now I've got a BCOSI file open, and the BCOSI is the Operational Stress Injury Clinic. They had an intake for me and they accepted me. And then I ended up getting set up to talk to a psychiatrist and get a whole evaluation done, which happened later in June. But beginning of 2022, I listened to Bend Don't Break podcast by Chief Neil DeBoard. So there was one with Corporal Aaron Courtney. And I listened to that one. I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, I know the name because I worked in Mission and Corporal Courtney was a dog handler that was posted out of Abbotsford and part of the integrated unit. So when I saw his name, I was like, okay, somebody you really respect. And I heard his story and it hit me. I just felt I could relate to it. And it seemed that every podcast that I was listening, there's little bits and pieces that I could relate to. And I was sucking that up. Super impressive to see people that were battling the battle and they were putting that effort in. And the battle continues. Even now that I'm back to work, the battle still continues because I'm learning how to deal with the oncoming waves that continue to come and realize that it's just a chapter I can't delete in my life. I have to continue moving forward and writing a new chapter after it. I think that anybody standing that's still fighting is obviously a warrior of the highest level, especially speaking out. We need more people to start doing that.
It's exactly what you're doing today, though, right? It's exactly what you've done, which is which is fantastic. I mean, again, I mentioned it earlier, but you stepping up to do this is significantly more difficult than many people will understand. You know, especially considering that you're still active member. I mean, as I am, but I mean, I've been off for the last couple of months. You're still going on shift. You're still doing the gig, and yet you're talking. I'm terrified enough at times speaking, brother, but you are a warrior to step up, and that is exactly what's needed.
I appreciate the kind words for sure. And I think kind words all around are one of those things that we need to do more of, right? Building each other up.
That drives me crazy. I personally do not understand why people thrive in negativity and are so uncomfortable with complimenting or being positive.
I ended up being off of work for 14 months.
Wow. Yeah.
14 months is how long my struggle took to get back to the point where, you know, I was back into the building, getting back into uniform. So I've really seen that journey. And ultimately, I was diagnosed with PTSD through a bunch of testing that had already happened with my psychologist and everything else that was accumulated data. to the psychiatric evaluation. They found out that one of my massive triggers that was causing the nightmares, and I know this is taboo, but it was face masks. So face masks were what was destroying my world. And I knew it from the start when I first put them on. I was out of breath and I was getting anxiety. The psychiatrist says, I don't know, man, like I can't give you a mask exemption because it's taboo and I don't know what to do. And I've talked to some of my colleagues and they're all frustrated. Nobody can give me a mask exemption. So at this point, I was frustrated because I thought, well, that's all I need now. I think I told you before, the last night terror I had was April 4th of 2022. And my poor wife got kicked out of bed as I was fighting for my life. I only wore the mask for 5 minutes in testing that day. And I was like, that's it, no more. And that was the end of that. But then the rest of my journey started for coming back, because here I was doing better. Even the psychiatric evaluation said that I had done significantly with my improvement with physical fitness, setting a schedule for myself, giving myself tasks and goals. In his opinion, I was fit to start returning back to duty. And so this was the summer of 2022. Working through with a psychologist, this is where I found working with a psychologist really beneficial, because when I first had an anxiety attack, didn't know what I was dealing with, and it was pretty freaky. It was now a matter of training my mind to understand that it doesn't last forever, and trying to understand what I could do, what tools I could use in order to overcome that anxiety attack. Like, what could I do to make myself stronger through that process? Because they're going to happen, and they happen randomly. When I was able to overcome that, it added to a level of strength. It was like, okay, yeah, I still had the anxiety attack. I still had it. That part didn't change, and I still do have anxiety attacks even now. But it's learning how to deal with it and learning how to fight it, and learning that you'll survive and to overcome the fear of them when they come on.
Yeah, and I hear you on that. I do too, man. I do. I feel odd sometimes, but there's certain things that I feel could be, I don't necessarily like using the word trigger, because a trigger for me is more what sets me off and maybe puts me into a bit of a rage. That seems to be how I deal with things. But I feel like I'm going to be set off a little bit. And I'll take my Apple headphones, the over-the-ear ones, and it's got noise canceling on it. And I just need to get away from the overwhelming sounds and overstimulation and too much happening. And I'm with you. It's a tough fight, and it doesn't go anywhere. And it's just a matter of, okay, what do I need to do to get through it? As opposed to completely, as I call it, melt down. Yeah, it's awesome, brother, that you could do that.
That's a good point, getting through it, because it's not a matter of, you can't avoid it.
No.
You can't avoid it. You have to get through it, and you got to figure out how to get through it.
That's right. Yep.
I think that's where working with a psychologist is so beneficial. It's learning how to work through stuff instead of
trying to work around it is what we tend to do. And instead, you need to try to work through it. Fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah. The challenges of getting back, though, I tell you, I found a doctor in the Okanagan. He's dealing with some PTSD himself as a result of everything that happened through the pandemic. So he has been thinking of quitting. He says, you know what? I don't care if I get in trouble for writing you a mask exemption. I'm just going to write you one.
Good. Awesome.
Thank you so much. He's like, you know what? Kudos to you for continuing your fight. He says, I don't know how many people would at this point have just given up and said, yeah, you know what? I'll take a medical pension and I'm just going to leave. He says, kudos to you for sticking in. He had a copy of my psychiatrist report and all the rest of it. And he's like, if I can help you, because you still think you have life left in you for law enforcement, good for you.
That's awesome.
So he wrote me that. So I sent that to Health Services, and Health Services accepted that. Okay, you got an exemption. And then I waited and I waited and I waited. Beginning of November, I went back, and I hadn't come back in through the doors of that building for 14 months. I came in and it felt really, really weird, because being an LDP, which Terrace is, every 4 years, people are transferred in and out. So there's a lot of new members that don't know me, and there's ones that do know me that haven't reached out. Now they're uncomfortable with, what do they say to me?
Yeah.
And that's the whole separate conversation in itself.
Yeah.
And then I'm questioning my own existence of being back, going, have I done the right thing? Have I given up enough of myself at this point, or am I going to go down the same path? Can I handle more trauma? Like, I'm questioning myself the entire time. I think I was 3 days in. I had a civilian member, it wasn't a regular member, but a civilian member said, why did you come back? Was it worth it to you? And I says, what do you mean? Like, why did you come back? And I was really questioning myself at that point because I thought, like, do you know how hard I fought to come back? And I'm questioning why I'm back. And you're questioning why did I bother come back? And in all fairness, I had been offered some other community jobs. There's a lot of jobs out here. I did question, I have employers that are wanting to hire an RCMP officer that, hey, well, I'll give you a job. But no, I'm a cop. Like, it's in my DNA. Like, I'm a helper.
Yep.
I really wanted to be back. And when that happened, it kind of shook me. I actually sat down and I started filling out my resignation paperwork, and I filled it out. It's still in my desk. And I talked to my psychologist. I was like, it was tough, man. Like, holy. And he says, it's a super powerful place to be, but don't let it happen that you are forced to make a decision based on the actions of other people. That power be in your hands. So we talked about the game plan there, and it was, okay, if you have 2 bad days, when you have a 3rd bad day, you're calling in sick, right? Yeah. And you're going to go stand by the river with your fishing pole, and you're going to think about what you're going to do next, and you're going to calm your senses. You're not going to make any rash decisions, and you're going to recalibrate and figure out if this is worth, or you're going to decide to retire. And so that's the agreement I've made. And you know what? It is a super powerful feeling, because I feel like the career having a set amount of years is almost like a life sentence that we set for ourselves that we don't really realize we're setting as almost like a sentence.
Buddy, that's deep, but I'm right with you. Wow.
You don't have a choice what you're going to be subjected to.
No.
That tone alert could go off today. It might not go off today. It depends, and it's random. So I think that when we say, oh, you know what, I'm going to do a 25-year career, that's what I said. I'm going to do a 25-year career. And then as the trauma increased, I'm like, if I can make it to 20 years, Larry, if I can make it to 20 years.
Yep.
And now I'm at a point where as I've come back, I'm taking it day to day. That's how I'm dealing with it. Because you know what, if I decide we're done, then we're done. And that's the promise I've made to my wife upon returning, because she didn't want me to return, honestly. She says, you know what, I support you. I want you to be happy. So, if you feel that you're going to go back, be aware I'm going to pay attention to you. And if things are off the rails, I'm going to tell you, and you're done. She saw the change happen. Like, we change.
Absolutely.
We become different versions of ourselves. And then she saw the transition happen as I went through the treatment with psychologists and the psychiatrist. And she's like, yeah, you become a better version of yourself again. And I don't want to see you go a different direction again. So this is the way I'm taking it right now, because 20 years, can you do 20 years? Well, it depends. And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. It depends. And I think that if we stop putting pressure on ourselves, like a sentence, like, okay, well, I got to make it to 20. And if I don't make it to 20, then I'm not successful. Then I don't get my pension. What does your pension do for you if your health is declined? If you're not healthy enough to enjoy the pension, what does that mean to you? We need to tell ourselves that, we're going to take today and we're going to do our best today. And then if we find that we're done, we call it when we're done. These scars that I wear, at this point, I think I've lost my ego, Larry.
I like that.
I think I've lost it because I don't even care. I can tell my story to you as I'm telling, and I tell people that I'm working with as well. You know what? I'm going to give you an example. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to a file. I went to back up some other officers. By the time I got there, I realized as I'm walking up, I can hear there's an AED going. It's a chaotic scene. At the end of the day, the individual female passes away. Her kids are in the residence. The husband's in the residence. And we'll just say there's issues there. This is where the experience is for me. The first day back, I said to the others that attended that call, how'd that affect you? And they're like, yeah. I had like an epiphany there that I realized the way we check on each other needs to change, because I said, you're good with that? And well, yeah. And I'm like, really? Because I wasn't. And I shared why I wasn't good with it. And as soon as I shared what I was not doing well with, the floodgates opened.
You broke down the wall.
And all of a sudden,
you tore the wall down.
Yep. There was no ego. And as soon as that was like, because, we got new recruits that are trying to impress field coaches, and we've got, young members trying to impress higher ranks and senior members. These are still junior guys. And I'm like, no, I'm not okay with this. This is what I'm not okay with. This is what I had to work through. And actually, the first day I was numb. And the second day I couldn't even still go fishing because I just didn't want to be around people. And they're like, boom, yeah, me too. And we were able to talk about it. And wow, like what a team building type thing to you're just like, we're on the same page. So I think that's so important.
Yep, with you.
It's just to drop the ego.
With you, 100%. Absolutely agreed. And I love the fact that you went in with the younger members, less service, not necessarily in age, and really broke down those walls, because that's what needs to happen. And that's a difficult thing to do because, I mean, as you put it bluntly, Patrick, it becomes egos. And egos are, I mean, we survive sometimes on that, really and truly. It's just this profound belief that whatever you put us into, we're going to come out of. And I mean, you can't think otherwise because, well, I mean, I don't know. You can't think otherwise. And then you start splitting at the seams, which is what I think originally began my issues, is you lose that ego. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But it's actually accepting the realities. That's what a lot of members don't do. They just can't cope with it.
Well, and we don't understand it either. We don't understand what we're dealing with, right?
Right.
Like what I might describe initially as like a breakdown could be described by my psychologist as you coming to terms with your emotions.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the way we think about it, because yeah, you got a male ego, you got an A-type personality, and you're like, holy cow, how come I can't shut off the tears?
Yep.
It's not that there's nothing to do with strength. It's just that you, for the first time, have connected to your emotions.
That's right. That's right.
So the journey continues, and I'm back. I look forward to work in a different way. Right now, I'm more concerned about the mental health of the members I work with and how they're doing versus my career, to be honest. I've never really cared about promotion, so that's not a big driving factor for me. I'm more concerned about the members I see that are all around. You know, I've got a whole list that I regularly check up on. And the one solution is, like I said, reaching out to each other. Like, how are we doing it? I really think that we could learn better how to reach out, like have a better system for reaching out to each other. Like ignoring each other isn't a good thing. And even when we ask the question, you know, hey, how are you doing? And that's a good question. It is a good question, but it's not the question you ask all the time. It's the question that if you say, how are you doing, to a person that doesn't necessarily respect you or trust you, which trust is a massive thing like we talked about.
Huge.
How do you know that they're going to respond to you in the way that either they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, or they're going to think maybe that you can't handle the truth? Like, are you going to get a true response? And you're asking that question and putting additional stress on that person to come up with an answer that they may have a hard time giving you.
And then throw in the other side, Patrick, as well, that there was a long time that I would rather go up to a person on the street that I had no idea who the hell it was and tell them, as opposed to tell someone in the outfit, because again, I was concerned that was going to be on the file, it was going to get back, it was going to end up blackballing me, right?
Totally. And that comes down to that sanctuary trauma piece that we've got so prevalent too, right?
Right.
Getting that feeling that you're not supported by other members because you hear a rumor that's floating around, and so now you feel on edge. Like,
we started this conversation off with old school people, right? About old school policing, old school thoughts. I mean, I think that's part of the reason you and I hit it off right from the first moment we started talking a couple of weeks ago was, yeah, we tend to be some old school thinking, but add that little bit of drop the ego, like you said, and be okay with talking about mental health and really trying to help people as opposed to just going, well, it's nothing, turn it off. You know what you're getting into. And there's something to be said for that. The concerning thing for me is I get messages every single day, at least a message every day from somebody. And for me, the same thing was thinking 25 to 30 years. And here I am now working on 22, and I'm not sure what the hell's going to go on. And I really want to make to 25. And then I hear from members that go, holy shit, you've got 21 years completed? And I'm kind of thinking, what's the big deal with that? Well, because so many members are leaving it significantly earlier due to the amount of stress, the amount of trauma. I mean, I've heard from members that have 7 years service. I've heard from a member that has 5 years service and are already diagnosed. And I mean, something has to wake up to this. Something, someone, whatever. This is a reality. And if it's not dealt with in a way that you're supporting members and you're helping them and you're doing what needs to be done to really watch out for their physical and mental health. I don't know, man. Recruiting is hard enough as it is. And, it was tough when you started losing members at 30 years and then 25 years. And now making it to 20 is not necessarily a super everyday thing. So there's some things to think about. Patrick, before we end off here, obviously I want to say thank you very much. Great deal of respect for you. I was going to say I hope our paths cross, but our paths will cross at some point. I know that. It would be great to be able to meet you and sit down and have a beverage together. In the meantime, again, I thank you very much for being on the episode. Is there anything else that you would like to add? This is your time. Whatever you want to say, man, go ahead.
Again, thank you for what you're doing, and I really appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to perhaps help other people that are on the sidelines wondering what they should do, what they're feeling. Hopefully it even helps one person. That would be my ultimate goal. The only other thing I want to talk about is in my thought process about solutions, because I'm all about, if we got something, can we fix it? And the big things, we already talked about reaching out to others, and that's super important. And part of that is, I hate to use this word, but the Capra model.
Yeah.
We seem to Capricize everything except for mental health, in my opinion. And what I'm getting on that is we don't think about the other clients. We don't think about the spouses, the children of those suffering, the close coworkers, the close friends of those suffering. They seem to get lost in the process, right? I can tell you honestly, even to this point, my wife, who's been my ultimate strong point, she's kept me going, she hasn't been reached out to by the RCMP. Nobody's offered her any sort of support. Our families, ultimately, the kids get the snappy responses from the stressed out parents, and stressed out spouses get snapped at. And I really wish that we'd really look at supporting the spouses of members that are off as well, making sure that they're taken care of so that they can feel like they're part of the process, because they are. The other part was just echoing again the importance of the physical aspect, getting out, getting moving. But I really appreciate all the work you're doing, and I think it's huge. I really do.
Thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate that. And just to end off on the episode, to speak to some things that Patrick said in terms of being contacted by people. The only thing I've gotten from Ottawa is a postcard that actually came from the ATF attaché. And it's great, and it stays on my desk because all it says on it is, love your brother. When Patrick talks about his wife and the importance, I just want to take a moment to thank her for taking care of my brother. I really appreciate that. And she's an amazingly strong woman, Patrick. There's no doubt in my mind about that. As is my wife. I have no problem saying that. She is my rock. I absolutely adore her. We have been together for 30 years, and I still am in love with her and love her, and I am so sorry for the amount of shit that she's had to put up with from me over the years because of this and because of who I become, and I'm really glad that she's staying beside me while I work through this new part of my life, trying to get back to who I was before. The last thing I'm going to say is, Patrick, you mentioned about hoping that this helps at least one person. I can tell you, sir, you've already accomplished that because this conversation helped me. There were some things you said that really meant a lot to me and stuck. So that goal is achieved, brother. That goal is achieved. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please also have mine.
Don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it